You don't want that, because that's how zombies are made. All of this apart again. Oh, that was scary. What was that? Welcome back to the channel. If you guys remember the last time we went ahead and built this rear axle, welded up the rear end, built the axle shafts. Now we need to work on some of the stuff up front. But first, I need to get this thing back down into workable land. We're gonna pull these tires off, and I'm gonna try to fix this power steering leak. As you can see here, this whole frame is completely soaked. That's just from sitting here for a day and a half. That, and that actually, all of this is from when it was just sitting there when I was doing the cage. Kind of getting tired of stuff dripping everywhere. Plus, I don't really want to work on the front end until I have that leak fixed, because nobody wants power steering fluid, or any fluids really, in their eyeballs or mouth or face. So let's get started. Wrong way. That's gonna be cooler in my head. I was planning on it going out there. Let's try it again. Better. Flat. Now, one of the things I definitely don't want to have is a flat spare. I mean, that's pretty much 100% useless. This thing is wore out, it's in bad shape. In fact, it's not even the same size as the other tires. So I want to go ahead and take this thing off and replace my tires with some bigger and better ones, because we're allowed to go up to a 33. And if you guys remember, I did a video on how to unseat tires. This was my go-to tool. So we're going to use it today. I can add an Amazon link to it if you'd like as well. There we go. Just get it where that's down. That's simple. So normally for us Americans, if we were gonna run a 33-inch tall tire, we find a 33 950 or 1050 or 1150 or 1250 15, and we put it on. There we go. In this case, because this is a 16-inch wheel, it's all metric. So I went with a 285/75 R16. There we go. Got you, sucker. There it is. So that's gonna give me a 33-inch tall height. Of course, I wanna get as much height as possible. One of the tire companies that actually matches up pretty close to their height is the Milestar Patagonia. So I went with the Milestar Patagonia MT02. Of course, it's also way more aggressive. And these MT02s actually have more silica in the rubber, which gives them a little more traction. Easiest way I've found to get a tire back on the wheel, good old hammer. Now, if that tire doesn't look 1,000 times better, I don't know what does. Bam. Got some size on her now. All right, all the tires are mounted up. Now we can work on this steering leak. You ready?
Ready.
So where I think our leak might be coming from is somewhere in here, because you can see that it's real wet down in here, even though it's completely soaked at the box. I think that one of our two hoses coming out of this unit are leaking. Now granted, nobody keeps Land Rover stuff in stock. Like, I've been trying to get parts, little pieces here and there, and they're like, we don't even have that. So I had to order everything online, but was able to find the hoses and a new steering reservoir pretty cheap. Let's put these on. I had to fill it up just to drive it over here because it had leaked all the way out. And it's pretty darn empty right now. So we'll just disconnect parts and see what happens. This thing doesn't even sit in there good. All right, now I can see the hoses I need to disconnect here. Looking like a lot of it's coming out of this feed hose, so I think that's gonna be where our problem is, potentially. All right, so we got this up in the air, and I can see right now how wet these hoses are, which what I think is it's leaking at the top of the hoses and working its way down. Either this reservoir is bad or one of these hoses is bad, but they are so wet that they have to be leaking something. That's what I want to take out. And there it is, leaking everywhere, but I don't have any choice. This hose here was actually rotten. Like, I was trying to pull it, you can see where it's actually rotten in that spot and peeling apart. That probably is our hose issue. You guys know as well as I do, if I wouldn't have bought this reservoir, then this reservoir would have been what's cracked. And if I wouldn't have bought both hoses, then it would have been the other hose of the one I bought that would have been bad. For sure, every time. More Uzis. All right, here is our bad hose. Oh wow, that can just turn in there. That's probably not good. Like, that should not be able to do that. That's supposed to be a crimped connection like this, our new one. But I am concerned that they didn't give us enough hose, which they're about 3 inches shy. They always do that. Oh yeah, lots of room to work. This is fun. Okay, that's cool. Good on Rover for that. I like that. Watch myself do this for 20 minutes and we'll get it. We got it. I just gotta remember which way goes which. That-ish. So I had a company send me these. I'm gonna give them a shot here since I got a whole mess underneath this truck now. It's called E-foam. It's supposed to be a foam sponge that you can like reuse. I guess you can wash them out and reuse them, but find out. Well, soaked it up. See if we can get this back on. Oh yeah. So while I don't think this was the problem, I am going to go ahead and still replace it anyway. That way everything's new here. I don't want to be leaking on the trail. And honestly, I like having power steering. All right, got that tight. Now we can put this in, find a little screw. Hopefully it'll actually hold it in here now with the new one, instead of just being a sloppy mess, but you never know. Give it a shot. And it's tight, it's not gonna come out. That's a win. Now we can fill it up. Getting home, sucker. Maybe that's better. Some of you are probably wondering why this power steering fluid's red. It's because I was using this power steering stop leak. I'm still gonna pour it in. It also will kind of help that pump a little bit from going dry. Who knows how many times. We'll see. All right. So if you guys aren't familiar with most batteries, they are a lead acid setup with distilled water that is acidic inside of it. What I don't want is, we know this thing's probably gonna roll. I don't want those to come off. So if you look at this, lots of batteries have caps right here and here, and that is where you'd fill them. This one has little caps, these little circles, and then it's underneath this sticker, and then this little circle. Now what I have seen happen in the past, somebody takes a hard roll, those caps pop off, battery acid now comes out of the vehicle. I'm not a fan of that. I don't like that. And that is one of the many reasons why I run Optima batteries, which is what I'm gonna put in this thing as well. Top that off with the fact that there is nothing holding this battery down. So we're gonna have to get creative in that aspect too. Ugh. This is a good battery, I just don't want it for off-roading. So like for a car, I'll throw it in a car, no problem. For what I'm doing, for off-roading specifically, if there's a chance that I'm gonna be on my side or rolling over completely, I want a battery that's sealed up, gel style, that can be mounted in any direction like an Optima. That's why I'm choosing an Optima. Oh yeah. So as you can see here, this cap does not come off. It is solid. There's nowhere to fill anything. There's nowhere for this thing to fail unless you physically break it. So I want to put it in here, but there is one thing I have to do. Like I said, there is no battery mount in here, and I don't want to just do the old high school trick of a bungee cord. I'm going to have to make something that holds this battery in. I dug through my hoard pile, found this piece of all thread that already has nuts on it, and this piece of coil roll. So I might try to bend the all thread and see if it'll bend and hold. We need to make a J hook, If it doesn't hold, if it looks like it's cracking, then I might go ahead and just cut it, weld this on, bend this into that J-hook. Yeah, you can see there it's cracking that all thread, which is what I kind of expected. I might try to put a little button hook on the end here, and then maybe I can just weld these up, and that'll give it its strength back. So what I made is a J-hook right here. I went ahead and welded the bottom just to make sure it's stronger. It can sit in this hole. There's a factory hole here that probably had a J-hook. And then I took a piece of angle iron, drilled some holes, pretty rudimentary, but it's gonna keep it together. I found a factory bolt on this side, and I was able to find a nut that fit on it. There we go, got it. And there we go. That ain't going nowhere. You're going nowhere. So now that we got the Optima battery in, I don't have to worry about rolling over, which is a very good thing, because if we had the old battery in there with the liquid acid, that comes splashing out. If something breaks, comes splashing out, hits you in the face. You don't want that, because that's how zombies are made. And we don't want to have to be fighting off a zombie apocalypse at the Matt's Off-Road games. The old Tea Party ain't gonna start no zombie apocalypse, tell you what. Hopefully that fixed our power steering conundrum. If we do still have more leaks, I'll have to find them later. But at least I got what I think it was, and we have a few new parts to prove it. So went ahead and re-disconnected the battery. One of the other issues I've been having with this thing was popping the hood. The hood release latch was in horrible shape. Actually, I ended up removing the mount up here for it. That way I could just raise and lower the hood. I can't leave it like that or the hood's gonna flop everywhere. So what I'm gonna do is put on some hood pins too. All right, so I bought some just cheapy hood pins off the internet. Just open the box up. These are like wannabe hood pins. These aren't even real hood pins. Like this part is the pin, and it's just like stick it on your hood and make it look like you have a hood pin. Like no, I need an actual hood pin. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Might as well just throw a fake scoop on it too. All right, well, can't do that. All right, well, next order of business. We 100% need to clearance these fenders, because the original tires, the 265/75/16s, rubbed up in here. You can actually see where they caught the metal there and peeled everything back. So, time for the camel trim. I think the camel trim is really just this back section though, not all of it. Because this thing had oversized tires, somebody kind of did what you would call the camel cut, I think is what the Land Rover guys call it. But they didn't fold the fender at all, they just cut it out. What I want to do though, because we're going to have a lot of up and down travel, especially without a shock, so it's all going to be on the coil, is I want to get it way up here at this height, which means we have to come way up in here. But you got to remember that this is steel and this is aluminum. Yes, they're both metal. Also, here's the funny part. I think this thing was in a wreck. You see these bubbles here? That's rust bubbles that shouldn't be on aluminum, along with this Bondo crack here and a Bondo crack there. And if you guys remember when I did the back end here, that sway bar bracket was actually bent, which leads me to believe this thing might have been hit at one point. And we got some nice rust right there. So I want to make my marks just inside of where I want my total cut so that I can fold the metal in, and that way it's going to add strength to the body as well. Something like this. And I don't really need to cut much out of this because this has already been cut. So it'll probably be about like that. Cutting through the steel was really, really easy. But once you get to aluminum with a cutoff wheel, what happens is it starts galling up your cutoff wheel. Let me show you a little trick for that. So one of the tricks to keep your cutoff wheel from galling up when you're cutting aluminum is using grease. Now normally I say go buy the cheapest grease you can find. Unfortunately, all I got is the Crimson grease. But either way, it'll still work. Here's what you do. And it's that simple. Now we are all greased up, ready to go. Normally I have like a tube gun of cheap grease that I use, but when we moved, I threw it away because you don't want to leave it out, and I didn't want to get grease on everything. So I just need to go to the store and get another one. I don't think I've had to cut aluminum since. So first aluminum cut in the shop. So you saw how fast that just cut through aluminum. Usually when you're cutting through aluminum, it slows it down, it takes a long time, it starts shooting a bunch of aluminum slag all over everything, which I still got plenty of aluminum on me, but it cut through it real fast. The next thing I want to do, so this isn't just flimsy metal flopping around, is I'm going to do little pie cuts so that we can fold this fender in like the original Fender will. Normally I wouldn't mark this, I would just go in with my cutoff wheel, but so you guys can see it, I'll show you what I'm going to do here. So you just come in like this and you make cuts just like that, following any curvature, you know, because it's going to be a straight bend. And we'll cut out every one of these yellow spots. This is gonna stop right here, so I'll probably cut it here, and then I'll cut it back in there and around the front so that we can fold this all in. Something like that. So you can see how easily this cut through the aluminum. It didn't gall up my blade. My buddy Pat actually showed me that. And I know a lot of people might not know who Pat Helgeson is, but I can tell you this, if you guys ever watch Roadkill and you know Dave Freiberger, the super rad Jeep Scrambler that Dave Freiberger owns, Pat Helgeson built that originally. So he built that for Dave. If you look at it, Pat lives out of North Dakota. Dave's Jeep still has a North Dakota plate on it.
Looks like a shark took a bite out of the fender.
So the next thing we need to do is fold all these pieces in, and that's going to give this fender structure. Now these are what you want to have if you're ever bending sheet metal. These are some good ones. These are some steel ones. Don't get the cheap aluminum ones. They do not work very well. But I'm going to start with just some flat nose pliers. You can see all that Bondo cracking. So that's not the aluminum. That is just the Bondo doing Bondo things. Now normally I'd say if you put a thing of blue tape on here, that'll help the paint from cracking, but because this thing has got a full coat of Bondo on here, it's gonna crack every time. I mean, the Bondo's as thick as the aluminum down here. Oh, that's bad. Yuck. All the Bondo. Man, that is so much Bondo. All right, now we got our Tanya Harding 1000 and we just got to massage these things up in here. Massage.
Tires are heavy.
Got all the clearances now. Oh yeah. So this is just the original oil. I haven't seen any extra other than what kind of is just dripping off the residual stuff. So hopefully our power steering fix is holding. And just like the rear, we need to trim out the front. I think I'm gonna fold it right at this ridge line. That way it kind of keeps its look. So we'll come just inside of that, make our mark. Doesn't have to be perfect because we're gonna cut and fold, but something along those lines. So because we know the front fenders are 100% aluminum, we're gonna go ahead and grease up this thing again. Now Now we just gained like 3 inches of fender clearance all the way around, and we only went up 1/2 inch in tire size. So we should have more than enough clearance to flex in and out of here. You never know, if this thing holds up for the Matt's off-road games, I might end up stepping up to 35s, see how they hold up.
It makes it look so much easier than when I did it.
That looks way better than it did before with the new tires, the fender clearance. I think we're gonna be solid. We're gonna do the same to the other side, and we'll get to the next part. We got all the fenders cut out, got the tires on. I wanna go ahead and check a few things here real quick. I think you guys might like this. So right now, we can measure exactly how much droop we have at 10.5 inches right there. This side's right at about 10 inches. So what I'm gonna be curious about is once we remove the shocks, which I can just unbolt it at the shock tower, and then I got a little trick for down here. Let's see how much flex we can get out of it. All right, there we go. So much more clearance. I always like how a vehicle looks when it's up on a lift, and then when you bring it back down, it's like, oh, doesn't look nearly as big. All right, so that's 6 inches. This side should be pretty darn close to that same. Nope, that's 5 inches. This thing doesn't even sit level. Of course, there's no shocks in the rear. So we got about 4.5 to 5 inches of droop from ride height. So for all my American friends, the way these shocks work is just like a 2nd-gen Dodge, where the shock goes right through the middle of the coil, and then you have a shock tower up top that will pull the shock off with. Oh, of course, it's gonna be one of those ones. I'm gonna have to get a backup wrench on it somehow. All right, so I'm gonna hold the post and see if I can get it this way. There we go. Oh my gracious. I'll cut the shock off if I got to. Man, still not wanting to come out. All right, well this thing wants to be a total pain in the rear. Can't fight me if it's liquid. Okay, so I didn't want to really cut the metal because I have all this plastic, and you know it's going to melt with that heat. But I melted out the Teflon, and this thing still won't move. I don't know what to do with it, and you can see I've totally ruined the post now. The only thing I can do is pull this whole tower out. So I'm going to pull the tower out. Hopefully those 4 bolts, I can pull the shock out with it that way, and then cut it out here outside. Well, that one came off. Hey, 2 for 2. So what this thing has is like a little puck spacer basically on the bottom of the coil to give it its lift. The problem with that is you can't get to the shock bolt. So the post is hidden up in there. I can't get to it, so I gotta pull the spacer off to get to the shock post to be able to pull the shock off. This is turning into a huge project for something that I thought would be pretty quick. Like, we're just gonna unbolt some shocks. All right, so we got the bolts out. They're in a little bit of a bind here. So I'm just gonna try to pry on this just a little bit and see what happens. There we go. There it went. Got it. All right, let's see if we can get this shock off of here now, or if this whole thing's just gonna fight me all the way through. That is 100% spinning, so. All right. Well, it feels like coil's under tension, so that's neat. I don't know if I wanna crank that off until I put a coil holder on there. All right, so I have a coil compressor right here, but I only got 1. I used to have 2, I don't know where my other ones are, but this will work for what we're doing now. Hopefully, we'll find out. That doesn't seem safe. I'm taking this back off. I went ahead and went to the store and got some good coil spring compressors so that I have them on both sides. You know, because sketchy stuff makes you tough, but I feel like I'm tough enough right now that I don't need to do anything super sketchy where I have half of a coil spring compressor and a ratchet strap that's too long. It was still way too tight on that shock, which means the second that I got through those threads, this coil was going to come flinging out right under my hands. This is gonna be way better and safer. All right, so now we have the coil nice and loose, which means it doesn't have tension on it to this lower shock, which is a good thing because I don't want the shock blowing me in the face. Got it. All right, so we got the coil out. Now it showed me exactly what I need to do because without that shock in there, the coil is just gonna fall out completely. So I need to build a clamp when I go to put everything back in that holds the coil at the bottom and a clamp somehow that's gonna hold the coil at the top. But we need to repeat the same steps on the other side, so we'll do that real quick. There we go. Shazam. All right, now I can torch this thing out of here. PR Pro is not proing. All right, let's try doing this without blowing the shock up. Stinks. I don't trust this thing because it's all hot. I'm gonna go throw it outside. I think I might just use the cutoff wheel for the other one too. I was getting worried about the heat transferring down into the shock and working its way down into the gas chamber. I don't think it did, but I figured it just made more sense to just go ahead and use the cutoff wheel. That was dumb. So the way the Matt's off-road games are gonna work is you have to run the first day without shocks, has to be coil suspension, the second day with shocks. To try to do this shock and add this in overnight is gonna be a chore, especially if I don't have a lift or if it's still if it stays the night in the state park. So I need to make this a little bit easier to add a shock back in. Now, if you guys remember, I couldn't get my socket through this hole because this is the original shock hole. And then this is the new shock hole, but it has this spacer on, thus giving me my 2-inch lift. So what I want to do here is drill this hole out. That way we can get a socket in there. It's an 18mm nut for this shock. I'll probably make sure that I can get a 3/4 socket in there. That way we can get right up in here, put the shock on, tighten it up, and not have to take all of this apart again. Oh, that was scary. What was that? I have no idea. This thing just clapped out on me for a sec. Yikes. That was sketchy. Anyway, nothing like having the vehicle drop out on you. I'll have to watch back in the video and see what that was, but man, that was a little nerve-wracking when you're underneath it and all of a sudden it goes clank. But everything's on there good. Like, it's not like anything's not sitting in good spaces, so I don't know. Little sketch. We'll go ahead and drill these out. Easiest way to do that, step bit. Oh yeah. Now let's do the same to the other side. Dink. Obviously it'll have to be a short socket, but I can get a socket up in there from that side. That'll allow me to get that out. Next thing I need to do is figure out how to make a plate here that's like a half moon, goes into these bolts, and then holds this coil down because we don't want this coil to come out. The shock is what keeps it from falling out, and I need to make a clamp of some kind that clamps it on the bottom. We also got to figure out how to do that on the top. I'm not 100% sure yet. This sits like that. So if I can figure out some sort of half moon that I can run around these, that I can bolt in here, and then they can sit in around the coil, that might be our trick. I'm not really sure. Sometimes you just got to stand back and look at it for a minute, brainstorm, and then figure it out. All right, I need 2 inches of space, 6 1/4 inches of length. I need to come up 1.5 inches. See if I can make this. Something like that, I guess, will work. Let's cut it out and see what we got. Something like that. All right, now what we have is a very rudimentary coil holder. We get our coil back up in here. just like that. Get this plate on here, and we'll put our bolts through. Might have to get longer ones. We'll take a look here and see. Should be just enough. That should keep it together. I'll go ahead and put the nuts back on, and then we at least have, like I said, a very rough version of a coil holder, but we have enough room there to still get the shock in. Okay, so the next part of this is figuring out how to keep the coil here. Now, this is where the shock tower goes, like this. So this shock tower sits on the top. Because we are not running a shock on the first day, I really don't need this tower because this is how I'm gonna get the shock in. So I might just save these in the back and put them on the second day. But what I still need to do is figure out how to mount this. Now, I don't have a lot of space here to make anything work on the inside of this. I was hoping to just make something here. What I think I'm gonna do is try to make a hook that comes off of this and then down underneath that allows it to hold the coil. I don't know, we'll just have to try it and find out. Perfect. Boom. Perfect. This sits on top of the coil, but under the coil bucket. So what this is gonna do is slide underneath the coil and hold it just like that, but over the coil bucket so we can bolt it down. Hopefully that will hold it in. I'm gonna put this in now, at least in the back here, so it's stable. All right, so I'm just gonna set this up here. Can line up these lower bolts, and now it's temporarily sitting there. And without the shock in, the coil doesn't have to be compressed anymore, so it's not sketchy to put in. So I actually have more than enough room for the coil, which means it's gonna droop this much, so we definitely have to have these clamps in. What I'm gonna try to do here is get this slid on here and over the coil, just like that. Now, we can put this nut on. I know it's hard to tell, but I'm gonna put one on the back as well, and hopefully that'll keep that coil from coming off. All right, so what I learned with that one is I needed to slot these holes out so that I can get it over the post and then in. That way it tightens it down. We have this coil with a clamp on here and a clamp on the back. That was where that coil fell, so it worked out really good there. That's gonna keep that coil from being able to come out. And then we obviously have our clamp on the bottom. Now we just need to repeat the same steps to the other side, and then we'll see what we need to do next. Right, we got the other side in. You can see how much this axle twists with this track bar. The track bar is already a little too short for the lift. It doesn't have an extension or an adjustability, and then with it all drooped out, the whole axle actually shifts down this way. So that's why this is way off. We'll have to push it over and hold it while we set it down. I'm probably gonna have Shanna run this so that I can set those coils in. Go ahead. And right. Oh, hold on. Hold it, hold it. There we go. All right, now we can come down. Oh yeah. Now things are where they're supposed to be. Let's tighten up some stuff. All right, so we want to get these lower ones on first. That's gonna set our coil height. Fortunately, I have a ratchet wrench. All right, so now that we have the lower parts bolted on and we have compression on the upper coil, now we can go ahead and tighten up these uppers. Now, like I said, I'm not gonna put the shock tower in. I have enough studs sticking out that I can put them right on top of those coil keepers. So when I do go to put the shock tower in, we can just unbolt the 4 bolts, bolt the shock to the shock tower, set it through, tighten those 4 bolts up. I'll put a spacer on the other 2 sides where I don't have the clamps, and then we can just tighten up the bottom now that we have a hole through it. All right, we got the upper bolts tightened in. We got the lower bolts tightened in. Let's see how much droop we got. And then I still got one more trick up my sleeve that I think you guys might like. If you guys remember on this side before, with the shock on, collapsed, it went from 6 inches to 10.5 inches. Let's see what we got for droop now. 13.25, man. And then if you remember this side, it had 10 inches of droop. Let's see what it is now. 12 5/8. So each side gained almost 3 inches of droop there. Now let me show you one other thing that's gonna help us. Not so much with droop, but it's gonna help with the body roll and the flex. Now what we have here is a radius arm setup. Basically, there is 0 flex for this axle to do this, and then we have our arms up at the frame. Problem with that, this is why on like old Broncos, they talk about knuckling the passenger arm, and the same reason why I don't like double radius arms on like Cherokees and stuff for a long arm kit. Let me explain. So literally over 20 years ago, there was a race system before Ultra 4, before King of the Hammers, called XRRA, and it had just started. It was the first year, and they had a race in Colorado Springs. At that time, I worked at 4 Wheel Parts. I'd built myself a radius arm Y-link for my Jeep Comanche, and I kept breaking one of the upper arms every time, and I'd just beef it up bigger and I'd break the other one. I'd beef it up bigger and I'd break the other one. And it was actually my buddy Shannon Campbell. If you guys don't know who Shannon Campbell is, he's won King of the Hammers multiple times. He is very, very good driver. He's been in rock crawling for a long time as well. Shannon took a pin just like this and he said, hey Colt, take your fingers and do this. Keep them pinched tight and try to flex your axle. You can feel the pin twisting in your finger. I can feel it trying to twist in my finger. He's like, now take one arm off and now flex it. There's no bend, there's no twist in your finger, because now the axle can do the twist that it needs to do. What that gains you is a stability to your rig. When you have it pinched off like this, you drop off something, it unloads the back end of your rig. That's why I don't like radius arms, because you'll literally drop off stuff. If you guys have ever done Pritchett Canyon in Moab, there's a lot of like 45-degree, 3-foot drops. So what happens is your front end drops off, the back end unloads, and then it gets really light in the rear. When we take one of these off, we're gonna fix that. And how we're gonna do it is just with one bolt. Because this thing is like a C, it has a bolt on the front and a bolt on the back, what I'm gonna do is undo the rear one. And what that's gonna allow is for this axle to twist a little bit while this one stays nice and tight, because this is the side that my differential's on. The torque is on this side, so I want to keep both those bolts there. Now, if my differential was on this side, I would undo one of these bolts on that. If anybody else builds a Land Rover, this could be our secret weapon for us not flipping, and they might. So I took the back bolt off because on the front and back of this thing, the back bolt is actually above the axle tube. And I don't want to have that be my determining factor for this flex. It needs to be at least at the center or lower for me to feel comfortable with it. So I took the back one out, and now we'll be good to flex it up. All right guys, this was a lot of work for just a little bit of showing, but we got the fenders cut, we got the new tires on, we got the suspension set up where our coils aren't gonna fall out front or back now, and we have a game plan to put our shocks on without needing a lift or some massive amount of work to get that on when we put it on for day 2. Don't forget to go on coltbuilds.com and get yourself a rad shirt.
Or a hoodie.
Or a hat. We hope you guys like this video. If you like that one, check these out. See you next time. Bye.
Bye everybody.